Yeah, what we're going to do this evening, we're predominantly going to be looking at working age benefits. The benefit system, for those of you that don't know, is sort of divided up into working age benefits and pensioner benefits. But I thought for the purposes of this evening, we would look at working age benefits. And if there is any demand for something in the future, maybe it's something that we could look at a future date. Okay, so probably a good place to start is to have a look at different benefits and how they're classified. So we have means tested benefits. So things like universal credit, some of you may be aware of, income related employment and support allowance, income-based job seekers allowance, housing benefit, income support. So those are examples of means tested benefits that some of you may be aware of. We're then going to have a look at non-means tested benefits. So these may be classified maybe as more disability-based benefits. So things like personal independence payment, carers allowance. And then we'll have a look at contributory-based benefits. So things like New Style ESA, and maybe the state pension, and New Style job seekers allowance. These are benefits that are just based on one's national insurance contributions. And then we may touch briefly on local support that may be available from local councils around the country. Okay, so means tested benefits. The main means tested benefit available at the moment is universal credit. I'm sure all of you are familiar with it one way or another. So a quick summary of what universal credit is, and maybe to dispel some of the myths that may be flying around. So universal credit is a top-up benefit for those on a low income. So there seems to be many misconceptions around that if you're working, you're not entitled to universal credit. Not necessarily the case. So universal credit can provide assistance for rent, any dependent children that you have, any support, additional support if you're unable to work, and any sort of additional support as well for caring responsibilities that one may have. Means tested benefits can be claimed alongside any of these benefits here. They can increase certain means tested benefits, can positively be affected by claiming other categories of benefits as well. So some of you may also be aware that we're in the process now of universal credit migration, where people on the old style benefits, such as income related employment and support allowance, housing benefit, are starting to be moved across onto universal credit. And that's something that's going to be ramping up this year. So it may be affecting many of you at some point. So basic qualifying conditions for universal credit need to be of working age. In normal circumstances, you would have to be aged 18 to pension age, whether that be 66 or 67. In certain circumstances, you can claim that at 16. Hence the asterisk there. I don't really want to go into the circumstances of where that may be applicable, but for the purposes of tonight, we'll take it as 18. You need to have a right to reside in the UK. So whether that would be settled status or pre-settled status, or indefinite leave to remain, which is the same as settled status, and have savings of less than £16,000 and be classed as having a low income. A low income...
Seem to get no sound.
Low income for the purposes of universal credit is dependent on a case-by-case basis. There isn't a sort of one-size-fits-all approach. There are many factors that would determine a universal credit outcome or amount. So universal credit, as we've kind of touched on just a moment ago, is made up of different components. So this is the first stage of working out entitlement to universal credit to see which one of these components you would qualify for. So the first stage is the standard allowance. So that is an amount just for yourself, and depending on your sort of living situation, whether you're a single person or living with a partner. The next stage would be an additional amount added for any dependent children that you had. This is currently capped to 2 children, going back to 2017. If you were to make a claim now and you have, for example, 3 children that were born before 2017, you could still receive 3 components, for example. The change only came in for children born after April 2017. Next would be the housing element, so any help with rent that you may be entitled to. The next one would be the limited capability for work. So for the purposes of tonight, if your anemia meant that you were unable to sort of hold down work, or you would struggle to engage in any work-related activity in the official lingo, there may be an additional amount added there for you. Disabled child element, if you have a dependent child that's claiming disability living allowance, there's an additional amount that can be added to a universal credit claim. Carer element, if you're caring for somebody in receipt of a disability benefit, and some help with childcare costs. Okay, so this is an example of a universal credit statement. So we can see here that this particular person, single person, so they get the single rate, 368 for a single person. They get some support towards their housing cost. They're subject to the bedroom tax, so they lose 14%. And then they're also entitled to the additional amount because they're unable to work. So that, in this particular case, this person is entitled to universal credit of £1,364. And universal credit is paid monthly. So on the online journal, you would be getting one of these every month. So how to apply for universal credit? Universal credit is digital by default, which obviously can create problems for some people that maybe don't have internet access or don't feel confident making a claim online. There is other support available. There's the Help to Claim service. The DWP have entered into an agreement with Citizens Advice Bureau. So Citizens Advice Bureau should be able to help people make a claim, the initial claim, and manage it through to the first payment stage, to the best of my knowledge. In order to make the claim, we need to have information regarding household composition, so who lives in the house, information on your rent, savings, and income that's coming in, and as well as information regarding any health conditions, medical letters, fit notes, that sort of thing. There is a demo claim available online if anybody wants to have a stab at just working through the process. And that's available at the link there. So we'll touch on really briefly. Oh, 1 second. So we'll touch briefly on the managed migration, which is the process that we're in at the moment. So anybody, as we've mentioned, on the 6 legacy benefits, so income-related ESA, income-based job seekers allowance, income support, housing benefit, and tax credits, will at some point be invited to make a claim for universal credit. The official lingo is invited to make a claim. What will happen at this point? The move across isn't automatic. You will need to make a claim. So what should happen? When you're invited to make the claim, you will receive a letter in the post from the DWP inviting you to make the claim. The letter will give you a 3-month deadline in order to make that claim. And the DWP are saying that if you make your new claim within that allocated time frame, you will not be worse off at the point of transfer. So you will receive an amount called transitional protection. Some people at the point of application will be worse off on universal credit because of just differences in how it's calculated. But moving across, if you're doing it within that time frame, you shouldn't be worse off at the point of transfer. Transitional protection is a really complicated subject, and it's really not for now. So this is an example of a migration letter. So this person is claiming working tax credits. They actually have until next weekend to make their claim. So yeah, that's the one thing to look out for. And if you do it within that time frame, as I said, you will not be worse off at the point of entry. And this is just an example of a poster that some of you may have seen around, just informing people that the change is happening. What has actually happened, and I've seen quite a bit of this, people are receiving this poster in the post and not the actual letter over there. Even if you receive the poster, that is not your invite to make a claim. So even if you were to receive the poster, you don't have to do anything unless you receive that letter. So don't worry if you receive the poster, I guess is the message there. Okay, so looking at the migration timetable, this is the latest information that we have. This is obviously subject to change. There could be various factors that change this. There may be issues with the migration, maybe a change of government may affect this, who knows, but we can only work with what we have to go on at the moment. So currently, people on tax credits only, so whether that be working tax credits, child tax credits, and no other benefits, are currently being invited to make a claim for the universal credit. I guess they may be called the simple claims, perhaps. So as of April this year, people on income support and those in receipt of tax credits and housing benefit are going to start receiving their migration notices. Between July and September 2024, it's going to be child tax credits, ESA, job seekers allowance, and housing benefit. I think that's the information that I've seen. As of September, it will just be job seekers allowance. And then for some bizarre reason, those receiving income-related ESA are going to be protected until 2028. As I've said, this information is what we have to work with at the moment, but it is certainly subject to change. I think the migration process was meant to have been completed by 2020. So it's very subject to change. Okay. So as we've mentioned, the DWP have mentioned that people that make their claim within the time frame that they need to do it are not going to be worse off. CPAG, so I don't know if any of you have heard of the charity Child Poverty Action Group. They're an amazing charity. They do a lot of work around poverty. So a report has found that 27% of people that are in receipt of the old style benefits and then invited to make a claim didn't do it within the time frame, and they're losing an average of £300 a month by not responding in that time frame. And I think this quote here is very interesting. So CPAG say that their research shows that claimants did not have the information they needed or wanted to understand how moving to UC would affect them. Such misinformation and misunderstanding are likely to be reasons some people are not moving to UC, despite having a strong financial incentive to do so. And I think that comes back to the letter. You know, it's not the most informative of letters. So yeah, I think it just highlights the point. If you receive one of those letters, yeah, act on it or get support if you need to avoid being worse off. I'll mention briefly pension credit. So pension credit is the sort of universal credit, if you like, the means tested benefit for people over pension age. It just ensures that people of pension age have an income at a certain level. So yeah, I don't really want to talk too much about it, but just to highlight, there is a means tested benefit available for anybody over pension age. And the government are very good at launching campaigns for the uptake of pension credit. So this goes in briefly to local support. So council tax support or council tax reduction. So again, this is a means tested benefit. Support may be available from local authorities for help with council tax for those in receipt of low income. Every council in the country has their own scheme, so there isn't any sort of uniformity that we can say, oh, you're getting this, therefore you should get this much help in help with your council tax. Doesn't work like that. And it may be the case that some people in some local authority areas are entitled to some support and others aren't. That's just the way the scheme is. But I'd also have a look, the scheme in your local area, or contact your benefits team at your local council if you feel that there may be some eligibility for help with your council tax. So income-related benefits, such as universal credit, are commonly known as passporting benefits. Passporting benefits are kind of what they say on the tin. They open up other areas of the sort of benefit and support system. Other areas that you may be entitled to. So if you're getting universal credit and you're getting low income from universal credit, as in you're not working or have a very low income, maybe some help with free prescriptions available. There may be an automatic entitlement to full council tax support, but that would be dependent on the scheme that your local council runs. The cost of living payments that have been around for the last couple of years. It's not clear at the moment whether they're going to continue after this round. We'll just have to keep our eyes peeled for that. And also help to hospital appointments available as well. So help with travel costs and things like that. Okay, so hopefully that gives us a really brief understanding of universal credit. So we'll move on to non-means tested benefits now. So as we mentioned before, these are what I would essentially class as disability carer benefits. So for the purposes of disability benefits, we're looking at personal independence payment for those between 16 and 66, 67, depending on pension age, attendance allowance for those above pension age, and disability living allowance for those under 16. But for the purposes of tonight, we're going to look just at personal independence payment. Okay, so personal independence payment is, as we just mentioned, is a non-means tested benefit payable whether you are working or not working. Many PIP decisions are refused on the basis that people are working. It shouldn't make any difference unless you have some sort of heavy lifting job that isn't sort of comparative or with your health condition that you're stating on the form. But yeah, PIP is a benefit acknowledging that one has a disability or health condition which impacts one's ability to undertake many of their daily living or mobility functions. It is assessed on a scale, on a point scale, depending on the level of restrictions that one has. And again, PIP can lead to other entitlements, which we will come on to a bit later on. Okay, so we just mentioned there are two components of PIP. So we have the daily living component, which is assessed at two rates. Currently £68.10 a week for the standard rate and £101.75 for the enhanced rate. Then we have the mobility rate, standard being £26.90 a week or £71 a week for the enhanced rate. You can receive an award from both, you can receive an award from both elements, receive an award from one, or nothing at all. So the initial sort of claim process for PIP. At the moment, you need to make a new claim on the telephone line there. The DWP are in the process of setting up an online portal for making PIP claims online. It's available in certain postcodes already, but it's not national at the moment. And I think the intention is to have that rolled out nationally by the end of the year, which will mean you won't need to make the telephone call. You'll be able to make and manage the claim all online. So there won't be long, complicated forms to fill out by hand, at least. Once you've made that initial call at the moment, the PIP medical questionnaire will be issued to you. The form gives you an opportunity to disclose and let the decision maker know how you're affected on a daily basis. So, any side effects that you're having from your treatment. So, maybe how fatigue affects you, pain, lack of motivation, those sorts of things. Generally, you have 1 month to return the form. If you feel that you're not going to get the form back in time, you are able to request an extension, but you would need to call up and request that. Otherwise, the claim would be closed, and then potentially have to look at making a new claim again. And it's always good as part of the claim process to gather as much medical evidence as possible. So whether that would be from consultants or your GP's medical records, or even supporting statements from carers or family members shouldn't really be discounted, because at the end of the day, they would have the best kind of knowledge of how you are on a daily basis. So I wouldn't discount that knowledge either. So basic qualifying conditions for PIP. So we mentioned that it's for working age, so between 16 or 66 or 67, depending on your pension age. Again, you would need settled or pre-settled status. You'd need to have a recourse to public funds that would obviously come about as having that settled status. You need to have been present in the UK for at least 104 out of the last 156 weeks, so 2 out of the last 3 years. Temporary absences can be allowed of up to a month, or if there are extenuating circumstances, you can make an argument that you're present in the UK when you're not. But we're not going to go down there for the purposes of this. The basic qualifying condition in terms of time frame, you need to have been experiencing the difficulties with the activities that PIP looks at for 3 months going back, with a reasonable expectation that those are going to continue for the next 9 months. So, they're going to be affecting you for about a year at the point of application. And PIP cannot be paid as an inpatient in hospital. So it can continue if you have made a claim and you're admitted to hospital. It can be paid for the first 28 days of an admission, but after that, it would need to stop, and then it could restart once you're discharged. And you can't make a claim if you're an inpatient. So you'd have to do that when you were discharged. Okay, so points mean prizes, to quote a famous game show host of yesteryear. So PIP is assessed on a points basis. So for each of the components, so for the daily living and for the mobility, you need to score a minimum of 8 points to get the standard award, and 12 points to get an enhanced award. So what are the activities that PIP looks at? So in terms of the daily living activities, we're looking at any difficulties that one would have preparing food. So that means preparing a meal from fresh for oneself. So whether somebody is unable to stand for a long period of time due to fatigue or dizziness and things like that, whether they need to sit down, whether there's a cognitive impairment that may mean that there's a risk to themselves of walking away and leaving the oven on, for example. Eating and drinking, if somebody again is too fatigued to eat and they're losing weight, maybe they need to be reminded to eat, may be able to score points in that activity. Again, remembering to take medications. If the fatigue is really, really high and there's a chance that you'll forget and you need reminding from family or a pill box or something like that, may be possible to score in that activity. Toileting needs, again, if there's any sort of incontinence or you have difficulty in getting off or on a toilet, may be able to score points in that activity. Getting dressed, again, if there's an issue with fatigue and you can go for periods of the week without putting clean clothes on for the majority of the time and you need prompting to do that. If there are any physical problems with bending down, for example, may be able to get points there. Getting washed, same sort of principle. If you need prompting to do it because of fatigue, or again, if there's any sort of physical problems, getting in the bath, for example, not being able to stand in the shower, those sorts of things. Those are things that may be relevant there. Communication difficulties. Yeah, this is for somebody that may have a cognitive impairment. So maybe autism, for example, and they need sort of help to sort of understand basic English. Reading, again, more sort of cognitive. If there's a learning disability and somebody can't understand sort of two basic sentences, there may be help there. Managing money, again, if there's a cognitive issue there, or there's impulsivity, or maybe a mental health condition that means people are unable to sort of budget their money accordingly, maybe some support available there. And mixing with other people, any sort of high levels of anxiety, people don't want to mix with any of their friends, sort of need encouraging to do it, need support, and there may be some points available there. So that's a really, 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 really vague sort of guideline of how points may be picked up in the daily living component. So moving on to the mobility. So the going out component, I think it's now called planning a journey, but it essentially looks at the same sort. So any sort of difficulties that one would have going out, I mean, it's not looking at any physical sort of difficulties. That's more the mobility, the next one. We're looking at here any sort of anxiety that one may have of going out. Maybe they're agoraphobic. Maybe they have a fear of how people will perceive them. There's a trauma relating to something and they just aren't able to leave the house. This is probably the most difficult descriptor. But that's roughly the sorts of factors that may score you points for the going out component. And the last one is walking. So any sort of difficulties that you may have with your physical walking. So whether that's sort of breathlessness, pain, walking at a slower pace, needing to take more breaks, and with it taking you longer to sort of get to your eventual destination. They're sort of factors that can be taken into account there. So that's a really, really rough sort of outline of how you could potentially score points. Okay, sorry to get quite legal. So in order to score points, what PIP is assessing is your ability to carry out an activity safely. So whether you're able to do it without causing injury to yourself, to an acceptable and reasonable standard in a normal sort of time frame. A normal time frame is if it takes you more than double the time it would take an able-bodied person to complete an activity. So, for example, we're going to come on to an example, and it can also take into account any aids that you would need to use, but don't necessarily have. So if, for example, you weren't able to stand for long periods of time, and in order to sort of shower yourself to an acceptable standard, you would need to sit down. It may be reasonable to get 2 points for needing a shower seat, even if you don't actually have one, if that makes sense. Okay. So this is a really generic answer in terms of getting washed, which you've just mentioned. So this could potentially get you 2 points. So respect of getting dressed, this is an activity the decision maker needs to consider. My client indicates that due to the physical conditions identified as a direct manifestation of her health condition, she struggles with this activity, especially below the waist, due to pain in her legs when engaging in this activity. To this extent, oh, I mistyped that. Sorry. She's reliant on her family members to assist her with this activity. This is very much the case here due to the aforementioned manifestations. Engagement would increase the levels of pain, culminating in the risk of injury increasing as a consequence. As such, she's reliant on the use of family members to assist her, as without this, we should not be able to complete this in a timely manner and a safe standard due to the possibility of injury to herself. I realise that's quite wordy, but hopefully that gives you the sort of general sort of stance about how it should be assessed. Okay. And you get 2 points for that, if that was accepted. Okay, so after you've completed the form, the chances are you would be invited to a PIP assessment. PIP assessments now tend to be in a range of media, whether in person at an assessment centre, or over the phone or over video. So, it may be that that's more inclusive now. Maybe people that have a mental health condition and can't leave the house. So I think that that's a step in the right direction. So the PIP assessments are conducted by an independent medical professional that's external to the DWP. They will tend to go through all of the activities that we've just touched upon, and you'll be able to sort of give an account of how they affect you on a daily basis. Off the back of that assessment, they will prepare a report, which will go back to the DWP. The DWP will then use this information and anything else that has been provided to make a decision. Decision notices are then posted out, and normal appeal rights will apply. So mandatory reconsiderations, and then on to tribunal stage if need be. And PIP tends to be awarded for a set period of time, 2 to 3 years typically. There aren't really any indefinite awards anymore, as there used to be under DLA, although those with long-standing health conditions can receive an ongoing award, which is typically 10 years. And obviously at the end of those fixed time frames, PIP can, you'll be invited to review and then check ongoing eligibility. So we've mentioned other entitlements that may arise from a PIP award, from universal credit, but there are other entitlements that may arise from a result of PIP. So eligibility for carers allowance. So if somebody receives either the standard rate or the enhanced rate for the daily living rate, somebody may be eligible for carers allowance, providing they meet the criteria. There may be a rise in certain benefits for getting an award of PIP. Under legacy benefits, it may not apply so much under universal credit, but it can increase entitlements to legacy style benefits, so things like the severe disability premium and other disability premiums, which may have an impact on people being better off at the point of transfer to universal credit. If you're getting the mobility amount, the mobility component, there may be an automatic entitlement to a blue badge and a bus pass. There may be, again, if you're getting a mobility award, a reduced road tax or a total exemption from road tax. And again, if you're getting the enhanced award for mobility, there may be the option to access the Motability scheme, which will give you access to a vehicle for the duration of the award of your PIP. So we'll touch briefly on carers allowance. So carers allowance, again, what it says on the tin, it's a benefit for those providing care for somebody in receipt of one of the 3 disability benefits. And we should probably add in there the Scottish benefits as well. There are some separate disability benefits now in Scotland. Won't go too much into that, but they will also fall under this category. So in order to qualify for carers allowance, you need to be providing a minimum of 35 hours a week of care to somebody in receipt of one of those benefits. You are able to work, but you cannot earn more than £134 a week. You don't have to live with the person. And depending on the circumstances, there may be an entitlement to universal credit, and maybe potentially reduction or exemption from council tax. So we're moving on now to contributory benefits. So contributory benefits, so these are benefits which aren't means tested, and they're solely based on your national insurance record. So, you know, when you're in the process of employment or claiming certain benefits, you're building up a national insurance record, which ultimately will go towards your state pension, whenever that will be. But having said that, national insurance can also count towards entitlement to other contributory-based benefits. And for the purposes of this webinar tonight, I want to focus on new style employment and support allowance. So new style employment and support allowance. Again, this is a benefit that one can claim if they're unable to work due to a disability or a health condition. You need to have been credited or paid national insurance for the last 2 tax years before the year that you're claiming. So at the moment, we'd be 21-22 and 22-23. As we said, it's not means tested. There will be a requirement to undergo the work capability assessment, which some of you may be aware of or have had experience of. And we're going to touch on that a bit later on. It's a working age benefit. So once you reach state pension age, you can't make a claim for new style employment and support allowance. And the claim process is quite straightforward, this one. And the link for that is there. I think there is a phone line available as well to do that. Okay, so we'll move on to perhaps to the dreaded work capability assessment. Work capability assessment is there to sort of assess one's ability to undertake work or even work related activity. So there are really three outcomes here. Somebody can be found as being totally fit for work. So what that means is they'll be required to engage with the job centre and basically do what they're told in order to keep their benefit and avoid being sanctioned. You can be classed as having limited capability for work. So that means that whilst somebody isn't required to look for work, they would have to be taking steps towards looking for work. So that may be attending courses or preparing a CV and just taking any sort of reasonable action towards getting towards employment. And the final one is having limited capability for work-related activity. So that is for the people that are the furthest away from work. People classing that activity are just kind of left alone and don't have to make any sort of steps towards looking for employment. So, as part of the work capability assessment, which applies under universal credit as well as employment and support allowance, in order to start the claim, typically you'd need to obtain a medical fit note from a medical professional that's involved in your care. It doesn't need to be a fit note, but it's that's the sort of accepted medical evidence. I don't really know why that's more acceptable than, say, a letter from a consultant, but anyway. So that's the easiest way to get a claim up and running. Once that's been done, a medical questionnaire called an ESA 50 or a UC 50 will be issued to you. The medical questionnaire will assess a range of activities, both mental and physical, and how these affect you and your ability sort of to work. So some of you may have seen it. Don't know whether that looks familiar to any of you. So we'll look at one example of one of the activities that the work capability assessment looks at. So you can see here, learning how to do new tasks. So can you learn how to do everyday tasks without difficulty? Yes or no? Can you learn how to do an everyday task such as setting an alarm or clock or smartphone? Can you learn how to do a more complicated task such as a washing machine? In my mind, the work capability assessment isn't fit for purpose. You know, just by being able to do those activities, in my mind, is no sort of fair way of assessing one's ability to work. But yeah, it is what it is, unfortunately. So looking at the activities covered in sort of the mental health route or the cognitive route. So learning how to do new tasks, awareness of hazards and dangers, starting and finishing tasks, coping with changes, going out, coping with social situations, behaving appropriately, eating and drinking. And the more physical activities, so moving around, standing and sitting, reaching, picking up and moving things, manual dexterity, communication, speaking, writing and typing, communication, hearing and reading, getting around safely. So that's more sort of visual impairment, controlling bowels and bladder, staying conscious when awake, and eating and drinking. So this is a model answer that I would use for the activity of completing tasks. I tend to make it sort of more kind of work focused. It's meant to be the work capability assessment, so why not make it work focused? So X states that she has considerable issues with concentration and motivation, and this is something which the decision maker needs to take into account. In a workplace setting, X would need to learn new skills and balance conflicting priorities in a busy workplace setting. In a current situation, would have doubts surrounding her ability to do so. This is evidenced by her inability to manage her affairs and reliance on me to assist with this to ensure that it can be completed repeatedly and to an acceptable standard. The apparent lapses of concentration that she suffers, as previously evidenced, would need to be considered by the decision maker and would affect her ability to operate in the workplace. She lacks the motivation to learn how to learn new skills and make it impossible and procedures in a workplace setting. And it's quite wordy and it's quite generic, but hopefully that gives you a sort of idea of the sort of route I would take when tackling that. So the work capability assessment, some respects it's quite similar to the PIP medical assessment. You'll be invited to the work capability assessment. Again, can be in person, can be on the phone, can be remote over video. The work capability assessment is assessed on a points-based system similar to PIP. You need to score 15 points in order to be classified as having a limited capability for work. And there are certain activities and certain points within each of the activities that we've mentioned that you need to get in order to be classed as having limited capability for work related activity. And I think we have an example of one coming up. So yeah, in terms of learning tasks, cannot learn how to complete a simple task such as setting an alarm clock due to cognitive impairment or mental disorder. So if somebody was unable to do that due to a cognitive impairment or perhaps a significant mental illness, if they were to get that activity, that would put them straight into the limited capability for work related activity group. Yeah, we've mentioned the 3 outcomes there. So just to recap, fit for work, we need to engage with the work coach and be subject to a claimant commitment. Limited capability of work, we'll not need to look for work, but we'll need to take steps towards work, so attending courses, writing a CV. It's probably important to mention that if you're placed in the what's called the work group of ESA, that's time limited to 1 year. After that 1 year, if you're not moved to the limited capability for work related activity group, maybe you're challenging a decision or there's been a change in your health conditions, your ESA claim would end at that point. Just to make you aware from that. And limited capability for work, there'll be no requirements to do anything, and that can be paid indefinitely. I want to mention permitted work as well under ESA. So whilst the ESA is a benefit that means that one is unable to work, you are able to do some work whilst you're claiming employment and support allowance. So the rules are you can work up to but no more than 16 hours a week, earning less than £150 a week. I think it's going up to 167, I think, so that might be outdated. If you were to do that, it would have no effect on any of your benefits that you're currently receiving. You're able to stop the job at any time if you're unable to continue, but you will need to let ESA know about it. So it's a good sort of scheme just to try out work. You know, if it works, great, you can keep doing that indefinitely and perhaps build up if you're able to do it. Or if it doesn't, you're able to stop and it will have no effect on any of your benefits. So I think that's quite a good scheme. So some more elements of local support. We've mentioned the local council tax reduction scheme. So every council, as we've mentioned, has their own scheme for assessing eligibility for help with council tax. There's also the discretionary housing payment pot. So everybody, every council in the country gets a pot allocated from central government every year to help some of their most vulnerable residents with any shortfalls that they may have with their rent. So that could be if they're affected by the bedroom tax or the benefit cap. It's sort of to help the most vulnerable people sustain their tenancies and to avoid homeless. And you can apply to that through the local authority. You do need to be in receipt of either housing benefit or universal credit. As it kind of says on the tin, it is discretionary. So it's sort of assessed on a case-by-case basis. So, if there's a particular need for you to live in a property and you're unable to move, the chances are you've got a good chance of being successful. But discretionary housing payments are awarded for a set period of time. The pot of money is limited, but it can sort of buy time if you're waiting for a benefit claim to come through. That will allow you to sort of have more control over your money if that was to come through. So they're good for sort of short-term solutions if you're trying to work towards a long-term outcome. A lot of local governments run hardship payments as well. So if there's a particular emergency that crops up, you need a white good, for example, or you need help with a bill, some local authorities may have a pot of money allocated to help with those sorts of things. And again, that comes from central government, and once it's gone, it's gone. So, top tips for making a claim, as I see it. So, carefully consider in terms of a PIP claim and an employment and support allowance claim. So, carefully consider how you are on a daily basis and how you are impacted for the majority of the time. So more than 50% of the week. That is the sort of measure that PIP is assessing you at. So, for example, if you can go for a 10-minute walk only once a week, and after that it leaves you fatigued, breathless for 2 hours or so, and you're unable to do it, for the rest of the day, you can make a case that you're able to do it once, and then kind of not do it repeatedly. So if you see what I mean, if you're not able to do it for more than 50% of the week, that's how the sort of scoring system works for PIP. Important to consider issues such as fatigue, anxiety, pain, breathlessness, and don't underplay it. If the conditions are really impacting you, it's really important to sort of get that across. And back that up as well with as much medical evidence as you can possibly gather. And I think, as I mentioned before, the evidence doesn't have to be restricted to just medical. Supporting statements from family, friends, or anybody that knows you should be given just as much credence. And I guess the last thing, if you're not sure, get in touch, and hopefully we can answer any questions that you may have. So I think that's it from me. Just some useful contacts there that may be useful. Happy to leave that on the screen. And now I will open up the floor to questions. I think it goes back to what I was saying before. Gather as much medical evidence as you can. Any supporting statements from friends, family that may be able to comment on how you are on a daily basis is all really good. Tribunals, I think it's important. I think the word tribunal really invokes a sense of fear into people, and I understand why. They're not the nicest of things to have to go through. But from my experience on that, I've done many of these over the years. Everybody, I think, is really there to sort of help and make sure that the right outcome is achieved. Remember, it's also important to remember they're independent of the DWP. They're there to sort of apply the law to the facts presented. And if you are required to go one, the option does exist to have a video hearing over online rather than physically attending court, which I think is good. Maybe that alleviates some anxiety, and it's always good to go with somebody as well, just for moral support. And I think it's important to remember as well, around about 65-70% of things that go to tribunal are eventually overturned in claimants' favors. So the odds are very good, and the tribunal are really there to help. They're not there to catch you out or anything like that. They're genuinely there to sort of to help and make sure that the right outcome is achieved.